Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I don't like batch painting. And in today's video I want to maybe study my own psychology in a way and see if I can work out why. Batch painting is a technique of painting several similar models at the same time to get the task done quickly or more efficiently. It's a technique that naturally comes up when you have a large number of models to paint, particularly when combined with wargaming. If you've just bought a few dozen models for a game and have a snobby gaming group that won't let you play until all of your dolls are all coloured in, the temptation is to rush through them and to treat it as a chore, an unpleasant task that must be fulfilled before you can play the game that you actually want to play. Whether that be Space Marines, Napoleon's Riflemen, or Frostgrave Gnolls. And Frostgrave Gnolls is what I have here. I picked these up a little while ago, as they are quite different from the average human, elf or orc that I usually paint. Because of that, I'm really interested in painting them, and I've built up 10 of them to batch paint, and to think about the process whilst I do so that maybe I can pick out some of the reasons why I dislike batch painting. I also have an 11th single Gnoll that I will paint individually so that I can compare the process and my mentality around it. As I started, I quickly aligned with the usual batch painting process. I picked one area and painted one layer on each model in turn. Once all 10 models were done, I would go through them again for the next layer. This started with the too thin coats to get a nice opaque base coat. Over that, layers of highlights. For example, the dark green clothing got 4 layers, 2 for my base coat, and then 2 sequential highlights of increasing brightness, mixing in lighter green paint with my first darker green. I then used the same basic process with different steps for the ochre and tan fur, browns for the belts and pouches, and metallics on the weapons. One issue arose quite quickly as something that I knew about but hadn't accounted for, and that is my painting handle. This handle is of my own design, specifically to let me position a model at any angle so that I can paint any feature of a model more easily. One feature it lacks is a clip or clamp for model bases, which is something that I've been meaning to design but haven't gotten around to yet. This means I'm holding the model to the painting handle with blue tack. This is strong enough for holding the model in place, and I haven't had one fall off yet, even 54mm pewter models. However, it isn't quick to swap models out when batch painting. The final feature I want to add to this contraption of a painting handle is a quick detach clamp of some description so that I'm not squidging blue tack around. However, we're here to talk about the painting and not my painting handle, and early on in the painting process, I quickly found that I had timed each layer of painting and that took about 30 minutes. I also found myself thinking, how many more steps would there be to complete the set? How many half hours the whole thing would take, and how to minimise those steps to reduce the overall time to paint the 10 models. But that's not right. I like painting. Surely if I'm spending more time painting, I'm having more fun because I'm doing the thing that I enjoy doing? I'm spending more time doing my hobby? Well, that should be the case, but clearly that isn't. So what I've proved is that I don't like batch painting, which was the premise of the video, of course, but can we have a look at why? Firstly, I can say that I don't usually make a formula for my layers as I'm doing here. My usual method for painting is to have only a vague idea of what colours and techniques that I will use, and then just to get stuck in and let the process define itself. I'll use techniques like wet blending, glazing, washes, dry brushes as I think any part of the model needs it, and I'll pay attention to all of the details of the sculpt, faults in the clothes, joins in armour, sculpted textures. I am, I think, quite involved in the process. By comparison with my batch paint, I make a single decision once and then spend half an hour carrying it out. My sister has pointed me in the direction of the Yerkes-Dodson law, also known, worryingly, as the optimal arousal theory, a psychological study from 1908 that compares the overall stimulus being input into your brain versus the capability you show in a task performed at the same time. My sister also pointed out that ladies who knit often watch TV at the same time, to have some audio stimulus as they are knitting to get that balance. Similarly, when I paint, I often have music or a podcast playing for exactly the same reason.
Just a few hours at the airbrush.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to do a deeper dive on batch size, actually. I think this is how I'm going to get a lot of the...
That's my video!
Paint Bravely is one of the podcasts I listen to. Brent and Casey both have their own separate channels, but present the podcast between them. In the same way Ninjon and Miniac between them present Trapped Under Plastic. Also, ED-SKaR and Ratman present Back to the Brush. Yes, that's my own podcast that I'm plugging. We have 5 episodes, that's 5 hours that you can listen to while painting. However, having a podcast or music playing seems to put me in about the right balance of stimulus to enjoy painting, if we assume that the Yerkes-Dodson law is applicable to me in this situation. But that is including my brain working on the painting that I'm doing for a single model. When I'm batch painting, that thinking is reduced, and I'm just repeating the same simple task 9 times after having thought about it only for the first model in a line. Then suddenly I'm enjoying one step, and that's the highlights to the fur. The previous layer of the fur was a brown wash to help define shadows and separate muscles and facial features. However, it was somewhat messy, especially when I'm spending less time per model to catch the pooling. So I needed to go back and clean up after the wash, but I was being quite careful about it. I picked out each individual muscle, knee, elbow, ear, cheek, nose, all of the features sculpted into the fur. And I also needed to ensure that my paint was thinned correctly and to take care with my brush control. Therefore, this step required far more of my brain to complete than any of the others. And if we look back to Yerkes and Dodson, that might be bringing me closer to the balance of mental stimulus for the task and helping me enjoy the process. Thankfully, as you can see here, the 10 batch painted models are done, and in my opinion, they aren't up to my usual painting standard. On his hobby Discord, Jangular has pointed out that maybe I don't like the results because I didn't like the process. That's quite possibly valid. It may also be that because I didn't like the process, I didn't put in the effort and skill that I would with a single model. But now I get to move on to the single model, and straight away I feel more relaxed about this model. Having only 1/10 of the models in front of me, it's easier to concentrate on the details rather than worrying about how long it's going to take in getting on to the next one in line. Conversely to the common thinking, I don't have to put this model down to dry for each step, as I was doing with the batch paint. I can leave one paint to dry while painting another colour, and I can bounce between my ochre, dark green and dark brown for my base layers really quickly and get that brown wash on in a fairly short time. The wash, of course, then did require me to take a quick break. As soon as I came back, I got stuck into some wet blending. The green clothing on the batch painted models, as I mentioned, were 4 steps of different layers. With this single model, it was 2. Before the wash, I put on a single base coat layer, and then the second was my wet blend. Every part of the clothing got a coat of the darker green, fulfilling the 2 thin coats required by the law, and mixed into that was the lighter green to make my highlights. Pushing the paint back and forth, adding little bits of one shade or the other, mixing the edges so that they are smooth fades. This process is one that I've really enjoyed before, and I enjoy again here. I had prohibited myself from wet blending in my batch paint because I feel it's not a technique I can do quickly, which brings up the question of, do I not enjoy batch painting because I lay out rules that make it less enjoyable? These points reminded me of a little project I did not long ago in painting the Tanith First and Only. I painted 10 models there sequentially. rather than as a single batch. And I enjoyed that project immensely. I didn't restrict myself from wet blending. In fact, that's the project where I first practiced wet blending. I also strongly considered the characters in that set. Each model there is a character from a book series. I recognise them, I know their names, I know their characteristics. For comparison, my batch paint today is a group of generic hyena people that I don't know very much about at all. I can certainly make some comparisons here, but there's too little data to have a valid conclusion. Realistically, my entire video today is too little data and not following the rigorous scientific process, and so no conclusion can properly be drawn. What I can do is come up with some possibilities that I can look into on future projects. One thing I want to test comes out of some of the things that I've picked out already, including painting several models sequentially rather than as a batch, and deliberately requiring myself to use more complex techniques, like wet blending, rather than restricting myself from them. If I follow these concepts for my next squad or group of models, how will that affect my thinking of the process, and how long it takes? And isn't how long it takes the point? The vast majority of people who batch paint are doing so to have completed painted models, not because they enjoy the painting process. So how long did this all take me? My single model took about 50 minutes, which is fairly quick, and in line with how fast I paint some other models at this level of detail. I was in the right frame of mind to continue the model and make it look a little nicer, and to double the paint time, but that wasn't the goal of the paint job or the video, so I left it comparable to the others. If I multiply the 50 minutes by 10, as if I could sequentially paint 10 models in the same amount of time each, which is of course unreasonable, I get a total of 8 hours and 20 minutes. If I look through my recordings of the batch paint, I have 11 steps, and each step took half an hour for a total of 5.5 hours. That proves that for me, with these models, this time, there was some time benefit to batch painting in the order of about a third less time. However, doing the batch painting part of today's video was an unpleasant task for me, and my single model was far more enjoyable. I feel I must revisit this subject in a few weeks or few months with another test with a different emphasis. But for today, I can come up with a few possible reasons why I don't like batch painting, which are: 1. I have associated batch painting as bad, so if I ever do it, I automatically go into the process expecting it to suck, and so it does. 2. I use less thinking power in the process, and I'm in the headspace that it's a chore rather than my hobby. 3. Because batch painting is supposed to be fast, I restrict myself from using techniques that I enjoy. 4. I consider mini painting to be my hobby and not wargaming, so I have less interest in having squads or large numbers of the same near identical models, and I'd much rather paint a single model differently to how I've ever painted anything else before. And so we are all done. I have my 10... Can you... batch painted models, and I have my single painted model separately. If you have any comments or suggestions about what I've spoken about in the video today, please feel free to leave them in the description below. One thing I know I'll get is that I painted the single mini last and immediately after the batch paint. That was deliberate because I wanted the single painting model to feel like it was the last in a long line of single painted models, and I think I sort of got that impression out of it. I also know that I haven't based them. I am aware I will eventually get around to that. Many painters have a pile of shame of all the models they haven't painted. I have a separate pile of shame of all the models I've painted but haven't based. So it's fine. It's fine. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. If there is anything else you'd like to know, check out the description first. I have some links to my other things. For my regular viewers, there is a brand new link that has appeared in there. If you wish to support me directly, you are more than welcome to throw a few pennies my way. However, with all of that said, these painted and my own brain studied for a little bit, I think we're done here. So, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.